Tonight, we drift slowly back through time to the streets of old New York. The city is quieter than you might imagine. The year could be somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, perhaps the 1940s or the 1950s. Streetlights glow softly above long rows of brick buildings. Small shops line the sidewalks. A bakery, a barber shop, a grocery with crates of fruit in the window. And in certain neighborhoods, there is another kind of place. A place with simple windows, a narrow door, and a small sign that reads, Social Club. Inside, men sit quietly at small tables. Coffee cups rest beside ashtrays. The conversations are calm, soft, measured. But these rooms are not ordinary gathering places. They are the quiet centers of influence for the American Mafia. In neighborhoods across the city, power is rarely loud. Instead, it moves quietly, through conversations, respect, reputation, and relationships built over many years. Many of these neighborhoods lie within parts of the city such as Little Italy, the busy borough of Brooklyn, and the sprawling communities of Queens. In these places, the mafia does not appear as it does in movies. There are no dramatic confrontations in the streets. Instead, there is something quieter, something structured, something that many residents simply accept as part of everyday life. Tonight, we slowly explore how this quiet system worked. The rise of neighborhood influence. To understand how these neighborhoods came under mafia influence, we must first imagine New York many decades ago. At the turn of the 20th century, millions of immigrants arrived in the city. Among them were many families from southern Italy and Sicily. They came searching for opportunity, work, and stability. But life in the crowded city was not always easy. Jobs were scarce. Housing was crowded. Language barriers made daily life complicated. In these conditions, communities often relied on their own networks for protection and support. Over time, certain figures within these communities gained reputations for being strong, reliable, and capable of solving problems. Some of these men eventually became leaders within organized crime groups that would later be known collectively as the Five Families. These powerful organizations included groups such as the Gambino crime family, the Genovese crime family, and the Lucchese crime family. But in the early years, their influence was not always obvious. Instead, it grew slowly, through relationships. A shop owner might ask for help settling a dispute. A landlord might seek assistance dealing with a difficult tenant. A business owner might want protection from thieves. And gradually, certain men became known as people who could make problems disappear. Their authority was not written in law, but it was widely understood. The social clubs. If you had walked through certain neighborhoods in mid-century New York, you might have noticed something curious. Small storefronts, often with shaded windows and quiet doors. These were social clubs. They were simple places. Inside, there might be a few tables, perhaps a coffee machine, a television playing softly in the background. Men would gather there in the afternoons and evenings. They talked about sports, about family, about business. To an outsider, nothing seemed unusual. But these clubs served an important purpose. They were the informal headquarters of mafia life. Here, members and associates could meet without attracting too much attention. Business could be discussed quietly. Messages could be passed along, and relationships could be strengthened. In neighborhoods throughout New York City, these social clubs became places where information flowed. Who was opening a new business? Which construction projects were beginning? which unions were negotiating contracts. All of this knowledge moved through these small rooms, carried through conversation, and through these conversations, influence quietly expanded. Respect and reputation. In mafia-controlled neighborhoods, respect was an important currency. But respect did not always mean fear. Often, it meant recognition of authority. Certain men carried reputations that were widely known. People understood that these individuals had connections, that they could make decisions, that they could enforce agreements if necessary. One of the most well-known mafia leaders of this era was Carlo Gambino. Under his leadership, the Gambino organization grew into one of the most powerful crime families in America. Yet those who met him often described him as quiet and reserved. He spoke softly. He avoided attention. And this calm demeanor reflected a larger philosophy within the mafia. Power did not need to be loud. If reputation was strong enough, people would listen. And so many interactions in these neighborhoods remained calm and controlled. A request might be made, a favor might be granted, a disagreement might be resolved, all without raised voices. The protection system. One of the most common ways the mafia influenced neighborhoods was through what became known as protection arrangements. Small businesses often operated in difficult environments. Stores could be targets for theft. Vandalism was not uncommon. Competition could be fierce. In some cases, business owners would agree to pay a small weekly amount to ensure that their store remained safe. This payment might go to someone connected with a local mafia group. In return, the business owner could expect that problems would be handled. Sometimes this meant preventing theft. Other times it meant discouraging competitors from causing trouble. But the arrangement often remained quiet. Customers rarely knew anything about it, and life in the neighborhood continued as usual. For many shop owners, it was simply considered another cost of doing business. The influence over labor. As the decades passed, mafia influence expanded beyond small businesses. One of the most powerful areas of influence became labor unions. Unions represented thousands of workers in industries such as construction, trucking, and shipping. By influencing union leadership, organized crime groups gained significant control over major projects. Construction contracts in New York were especially valuable. Skyscrapers, bridges, highways, all required massive amounts of labor and materials. By maintaining relationships within certain unions, mafia figures could influence which companies received contracts, which workers were hired, and how disputes were resolved. Again, much of this happened quietly. There were meetings, negotiations, conversations behind closed doors. But the results shaped the physical landscape of the city. Buildings rose, roads expanded, and the quiet influence of organized crime remained largely hidden behind the scenes. Settling disputes. In neighborhoods where mafia influence was strong, disputes were sometimes resolved outside the formal legal system. If two business owners disagreed about a delivery contract, they might ask a respected figure to mediate. If neighbors argued about property boundaries, someone with authority might be asked to help find a solution. These meetings often took place in social clubs or quiet restaurants. The tone was usually calm. Everyone understood the importance of maintaining respect. The goal was not public confrontation, it was resolution. In many cases, the decision made in such meetings was accepted by everyone involved. And once the issue was settled, life in the neighborhood continued peacefully. The illusion of stability. For many residents, life under this system felt stable. Stores remained open, streets were busy with customers, families went about their daily routines. In some neighborhoods, people believed that mafia influence actually prevented chaos. They believed that thieves were discouraged, that disputes were resolved quickly, that order was maintained. But beneath this calm surface, the system depended on control. Businesses paid money, unions followed instructions, decisions were shaped by a small network of powerful figures, and over time, law enforcement agencies began to investigate these networks more closely. The changing era. By the 1960s and 1970s, federal authorities were increasing their efforts to understand and dismantle organized crime. Investigations by agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation began to uncover the complex structure of mafia families. One powerful legal tool eventually used against organized crime was the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Often called the RICO Act, this law allowed prosecutors to charge leaders of criminal organizations for crimes committed by their networks. Over time, this approach made it easier to prosecute high-ranking mafia figures. Several major leaders were eventually arrested and convicted. One of the most famous figures of the later era was John Gotti. Unlike earlier leaders who preferred secrecy, Gotti became known for his public presence and flamboyant style. But his visibility also attracted attention from investigators, and eventually the legal pressure on mafia organizations grew stronger. A different New York. Today, many of the old social clubs are gone. Neighborhoods have changed, buildings have been renovated, new businesses have appeared. The quiet system of neighborhood influence that once operated behind closed doors is no longer as powerful as it once was. But the history remains an important part of New York's story. It reminds us that power does not always appear in obvious ways. Sometimes it moves quietly through conversations,